In the glittering heart of Hollywood, where dreams are born and shattered in the blink of an eye, Elliot Vance reigned supreme. His chiseled jawline and piercing gaze graced billboards from Sunset Boulevard to Times Square. But beneath the veneer of stardom, a storm was brewing, one that would soon engulf not just Elliot, but an unsuspecting doppelganger drawn into a web of deceit. Cut! The director's voice rang out across the set. That's a wrap, people. Elliot, brilliant as always. Elliot Vance, the man of the hour, flashed his million-dollar smile. Thanks, Jack. Couldn't have done it without this incredible team. As the crew bustled around, breaking down equipment and chattering excitedly about the upcoming premiere, Elliot retreated to his trailer. The moment the door closed behind him, his smile faltered. He slumped into a chair, running a hand through his perfectly coiffed hair. "Ramona, we need to talk," he spoke into his phone, his voice a far cry from the confident timbre he'd displayed on set. "It's happening again. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up." Across town, in a dingy apartment that had seen better days, Zephyr Thorne stared at his reflection in a cracked mirror. "You've got this," he muttered, adjusting the collar of his threadbare shirt. "Today's the day. You'll nail this audition and finally catch your big break." Little did Zephyr know, fate had a very different role in mind for him. As the sun dipped below the Hollywood hills, casting long shadows across the city of dreams, two worlds were about to collide in a way that would shake the very foundations of Tinseltown. Elliot's limousine glided through the streets, its tinted windows hiding the turmoil within. "Miss Delacroix, you don't understand," he pleaded into the phone. "They're getting closer. If they find out, everything I've built will come crashing down." Ramona Delacroix, Elliot's longtime agent and confidant, felt a chill run down her spine. She'd known this day might come, but she'd hoped against hope it never would. "Elliot, darling, calm down. We've weathered storms before. Whatever it is, we'll figure it out. Just get here and we'll—" The line went dead. "Elliot? Elliot!" Ramona's heart raced as she dialed the number again and again, each attempt met with silence. Meanwhile, in a nondescript office building, Inspector Aisha Khatri furrowed her brow as she pored over a stack of files. "Something's not adding up here," she murmured, tracing a finger along a timeline of events. "How does a man like Elliot Vance just vanish?" Little did she know, the case she'd just inherited would lead her down a rabbit hole of secrets, lies, and a truth so shocking it would redefine everything she thought she knew about identity and fame. As the city held its breath for the premiere of Elliot's latest blockbuster, a frantic search was already underway behind the scenes. Ramona paced her office, her Louboutins clicking a staccato rhythm on the hardwood floor. "We need a plan, and we need it now," she barked into her phone. "The premiere is in 3 days. If Elliot doesn't show, questions will be asked. Questions we can't afford." That's when a wild idea struck her. An idea so crazy, it just might work. Or bring their entire house of cards tumbling down around them. "Find me a look-alike," she ordered her assistant. "Someone who can pass for Elliot Vance, just long enough to buy us some time." Across town, Zephyr Thorne trudged home, another failed audition weighing heavy on his shoulders. As he fumbled for his keys, a sleek black car pulled up beside him. The window rolled down, revealing a face he'd only ever seen on magazine covers. "Mr. Thorne?" Ramona Delacroix's voice was smooth as silk, but there was an edge of desperation in her eyes. "I have a proposition for you, one that could change your life forever." Zephyr's heart raced. This was it. The moment every struggling actor dreams of. A chance, a real chance at the big time. But as he slid into the car, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was stepping into something far bigger and far more dangerous than he could possibly imagine. As the car melted into the night traffic, neither Zephyr nor Ramona noticed the nondescript sedan that pulled out to follow them. In the driver's seat, Victor Russo's eyes glinted with malice. "So," he murmured, "the game begins." The stage was set, the players were in motion, and somewhere in the shadows, the real Elliot Vance held secrets that could bring the entire charade crashing down if he lived long enough to tell them. In the days that followed, Zephyr found himself thrust into a crash course in all things Elliot Vance. From his signature walk to the way he took his coffee, no detail was too small. "Remember," Ramona stressed, her voice tight with anxiety, "you're not just playing a role. For the next few weeks, you are Elliot Vance. But as Zephyr delved deeper into Elliot's life, questions began to gnaw at him. Why did Elliot have 3 different passports hidden in his study? Why did he refuse to talk about his childhood? And why did Ramona flinch every time he asked about Elliot's family? The night of the premiere arrived, a whirlwind of flashing cameras and adoring fans. Zephyr, decked out in a tailored tuxedo that cost more than his yearly rent, felt his heart hammering in his chest. "You can do this," he whispered to himself as the limo door opened. "You are Elliot Vance." As he stepped onto the red carpet, the crowd erupted in cheers. For a moment, Zephyr was lost in the intoxicating rush of fame. But then, out of the corner of his eye, he spotted a face in the crowd, a face that mirrored his own, or rather Elliot's. For a split second, their eyes met, and Zephyr felt a chill run down his spine. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the face vanished into the sea of onlookers. "Mr. Vance, over here!" A reporter's voice snapped him back to reality. "How does it feel to be at the top of your game?" Zephyr flashed Elliot's trademark smile, but inside, his mind was reeling. "It feels surreal," he replied, the word carrying more weight than the reporter could possibly know. "Sometimes I hardly recognize myself." As the night wore on, Zephyr played his part to perfection, but with each handshake, each autograph, each practiced laugh, the weight of the deception grew heavier. Who was Elliot Vance, really? And what had happened to him? Little did Zephyr know, the answers to those questions would shake Hollywood to its very core and put his own life in grave danger. As the days turned into weeks, Zephyr found himself sinking deeper into the role of Elliot Vance. The lavish parties, the adoring fans, the endless stream of scripts and offers, it was intoxicating. But beneath the glitz and glamour, a growing unease gnawed at him. Late one night, as Zephyr wandered through Elliot's sprawling mansion, he stumbled upon a hidden safe behind a painting. His heart raced as he tried combination after combination, until finally, click! The safe swung open, revealing a treasure trove of secrets. Passports with different names, all bearing Elliot's face. Newspaper clippings about a tragic fire in a small Midwestern town. And at the bottom, a worn photograph of a young boy. A boy who looked eerily like Elliot, but wasn't quite him. "What the hell?" Zephyr whispered, his mind reeling. Just then, a noise from downstairs made him freeze. Footsteps. Someone was in the house. Panic gripped him as he shoved everything back into the safe, his hands shaking. As he crept down the hallway, a shadow moved across the wall. Zephyr's breath caught in his throat. Was it Elliot come back to reclaim his life, or someone more sinister? "Mr. Vance?" a voice called out, and Zephyr nearly collapsed with relief. It was just the housekeeper, but the discovery in the safe haunted him. Who was Elliot Vance, really, and what dark secrets was Zephyr now entangled in? Across town, Inspector Aisha Khatri was piecing together a puzzle of her own. "Something's not right about this disappearance," she muttered, pinning another document to her evidence board. "It's like Elliot Vance didn't exist before 10 years ago." Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Dig deeper. Not all is as it seems. A friend." Aisha's eyes narrowed. Who was this mysterious informant, and how deep did this rabbit hole go? Meanwhile, in the shadowy recesses of a private club, Victor Rousseau nursed a whiskey, his eyes cold as he watched Ramona Delacroix enter. "Ah, the puppet master arrives," he sneered. Ramona's face was a mask of calm, but her eyes darted nervously. "Victor, to what do I owe this pleasure?" "Cut the act, Ramona. I know what you've done." Victor's voice was low, dangerous. "Did you really think you could replace Elliot and I wouldn't notice? I own him. I own you." Ramona's facade cracked, just for a moment. "You don't understand. Elliot, he—" "Silence!" Victor slammed his glass down. "You have 48 hours to produce the real Elliot, or your little doppelganger charade won't be the only secret exposed." As Ramona hurried out into the night, her mind raced. How had it all gone so wrong? And where, oh where, was the real Elliot Vance? Back at the mansion, Zephyr was deep in research mode, scouring the internet for any clue about Elliot's past. A news article caught his eye, a story about a brilliant young con artist who had disappeared a decade ago, leaving a trail of broken hearts and empty bank accounts in his wake. The photo made Zephyr's blood run cold. It was Elliot. Or rather, the man Elliot had been before he became Elliot Vance. "Oh my God," Zephyr whispered. "He's been living a lie this whole time." Just then, his phone buzzed. A text from Ramona. Emergency. Meet me at the old Starlight studio. Come alone. Trust no one. As Zephyr raced through the night, his mind whirled. Was he walking into a trap? Or was he about to uncover the truth that could unravel everything? At the abandoned studio, shadows danced in the moonlight. Zephyr's footsteps echoed as he made his way through the dilapidated sets. Ramona, he called out, his voice shaky. A figure stepped out from behind a crumbling facade, but it wasn't Ramona. It was Elliot Vance. Well, Elliot's voice was cold, nothing like the charismatic star Zephyr had been impersonating. If it isn't my better half. Zephyr stumbled back, his mind reeling. You're alive? But where have you been? Why the disappearing act? Elliot sneered. Oh, my dear doppelganger, you have no idea what you've gotten yourself into. Before Zephyr could respond, a sharp pain exploded in the back of his head. As darkness engulfed him, the last thing he saw was Elliot's face, twisted in a malicious grin. When Zephyr came to, he found himself bound to a chair in what looked like an old prop room. Elliot paced before him, a dangerous glint in his eye. You want to know the truth? Fine. I'll tell you a story, Elliot snarled. Once upon a time, there was a nobody from nowhere, with nothing but his wits and his face. Like he clawed his way to the top, reinventing himself over and over, until one day he became Elliot Vance, beloved star. Zephyr's mind raced, trying to process the revelation. But the fire, the newspaper clippings, Elliot laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. All part of the backstory, my friend. You have to have tragedy to be interesting in this town. Then why disappear? Why bring me into this? Zephyr demanded. Elliot's face darkened. Because sometimes even the greatest con artist gets in over his head. Victor Rousseau, he knows everything, and he was going to expose me, ruin everything I've built. Just then, the door burst open. Inspector Aisha Khatri stood there, gun drawn. Freeze! Elliot Vance, you're under arrest for fraud, identity theft, and murder. Elliot's eyes widened in panic. He lunged for a prop gun on a nearby table. Don't move, Aisha shouted. But Elliot was desperate. He raised the gun, and for a heart-stopping moment, Zephyr thought it was all over. Bang! Elliot crumpled to the ground, clutching his shoulder. As Aisha moved to handcuff him, Zephyr's world spun. Everything he thought he knew had been a lie. In the days that followed, the truth came out in a torrent of shocking revelations. Elliot Vance, or rather, the man who had stolen that identity, had been running cons for years, but his biggest con had been his entire Hollywood career. Zephyr found himself at the center of a media firestorm, the doppelganger who had unwittingly exposed one of the greatest frauds in entertainment history. As he sat in a nondescript interrogation room, Zephyr couldn't help but laugh at the irony. He'd wanted fame, and now he had it, but not in the way he'd ever imagined. Inspector Khatri entered, her face grim. Mr. Thorne, we need to talk about Victor Rousseau. It seems this conspiracy goes deeper than we thought. Zephyr leaned forward, his heart pounding. He'd been an imposter playing a role. Now it was time to be a hero for real. Tell me everything, he said. As Aisha laid out the web of corruption and blackmail that stretched to the highest echelons of Hollywood, Zephyr realized that his greatest role was yet to come. The role of a lifetime, playing himself and bringing down an empire built on lies. But little did he know, the most shocking twist was yet to come. A twist that would make him question not just Elliot's identity, but his own. In the heart of Hollywood, where fiction and reality blur, Zephyr Thorne was about to discover that sometimes the greatest act of all is simply being yourself. But in a world built on illusions, what did that even mean? As night fell over the city of dreams, the stage was set for a finale that would leave audiences gasping. The question was, would Zephyr be the hero of this story, or just another victim of the glittering, treacherous world he'd stumbled into? The pieces were in place, the players were primed, and somewhere in the shadows, Victor Rousseau watched and waited, ready to make his final, devastating move. The tension in Hollywood reached a fever pitch as the scandal surrounding Elliot Vance's true identity exploded across headlines worldwide. Zephyr Thorne, the accidental imposter turned key witness, found himself at the eye of the storm. Mr. Thorne, are the rumors true? Were you really unaware of Elliot Vance's fraud? Reporters shouted as Zephyr was escorted into the courthouse. He kept his head down, mind racing. The weight of what he was about to do pressed down on him like a physical force. Today, he would testify against not just Elliot Vance, but the entire corrupt system that had allowed such a massive deception to flourish. Inside, the courtroom was a powder keg of tension. Elliot Vance, or whatever his real name was, sat at the defense table, his once charming smile now a twisted sneer. Victor Rousseau, the powerful producer, exuded an aura of smug confidence despite being on trial himself. As Zephyr took the stand, he locked eyes with Inspector Isha Khatri. She gave him a subtle nod. They both knew what was at stake. "Mr. Thorne," the prosecutor began, "please tell the court how you came to impersonate Elliot Vance." Zephyr took a deep breath. "It all started when I was approached by Ramona Delacroix." As he recounted the events of the past weeks, a hush fell over the courtroom. The tale he wove was one of deception, manipulation, and a Hollywood dream turned nightmare. But just as Zephyr was about to reveal the most damning evidence, the contents of Elliot's hidden safe, chaos erupted. "Objection!" Victor Rousseau's lawyer shouted, leaping to his feet. "Your Honor, I have reason to believe that Mr. Thorne is not who he claims to be." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Zephyr felt his blood run cold. What are you talking about?" The lawyer dramatically produced a file. "We have evidence that suggests Zephyr Thorne is, in fact, the real Elliot Vance." The courtroom exploded into pandemonium. "Order! I will have order!" the judge bellowed, slamming his gavel. Zephyr's mind reeled. It couldn't be true. Could it? Flashes of memory assaulted him, a childhood he couldn't quite remember, a sense of déjà vu when he first stepped into Elliot's mansion. "Is it possible?" he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. "Have I been the real Elliot all along?" Across the room, the man he knew as Elliot Vance let out a maniacal laugh. "Oh, this is rich! The understudy doesn't even know he's the star!" Inspector Khatri leapt into action, demanding to see the evidence. As she pored over the documents, her face grew increasingly grim. "Zephyr," she said softly, approaching the witness stand, "there's something you need to see." With shaking hands, Zephyr took the file. Inside was a photo of a young boy, the same photo he'd found in Elliot's safe. But this time, there was a name scrawled on the back. Elliot Thorne, age 8. No, this can't be real." Zephyr cried out, his world spinning. But as he stared at the photo, memories began to surface. A loving family, a talent for mimicry, and then darkness, a gap in his memory that spanned years. "It appears," the judge said gravely, "that we have a far more complex situation on our hands than we initially thought." As the courtroom buzzed with shocked whispers, Victor Rousseau stood up, a triumphant gleam in his eye. Well, it seems our little game of musical identities has come full circle. But let me assure you all, this changes nothing about my innocence in this matter." But Zephyr, or was it Elliot, wasn't listening. His mind was piecing together a puzzle he hadn't even known existed. "The fire," he murmured. "It was real. But it wasn't just a tragedy, it was an opportunity." He turned to the man he'd known as Elliot, eyes blazing. You stole my life. While I was recovering, lost in trauma and amnesia, you took everything." The imposter Elliot's smug facade cracked, just for a moment. "You were weak," he spat. "I took your face and made it famous. I lived the life you were too pathetic to claim." The courtroom fell silent, the weight of the revelation settling over everyone like a heavy blanket. Inspector Khatri stepped forward, her voice cutting through the tension. "Your Honor, in light of these developments, I believe we need to call an immediate recess. There are questions that need answering, and I have a feeling Mr. Rousseau holds more pieces to this puzzle than he's letting on." The judge nodded gravely. "Agreed. Court is in recess until tomorrow morning. Mr. Thorne, or should I say, Mr. Vance, you are to remain in protective custody until we get to the bottom of this." As Zephyr was led out of the courtroom, his mind whirled with questions. Who was he really? What other secrets lay buried in his past? And how deep did this conspiracy go? In the corridor, he caught a glimpse of Victor Rousseau being escorted out, a knowing smirk playing on the producer's lips. Their eyes met, and in that moment, Zephyr knew. The real showdown was yet to come. That night, sequestered in a safe house under Inspector Khatri's watchful eye, Zephyr grappled with his shattered identity. "How could I not know?" he asked, his voice raw with emotion. "How could I forget an entire life?" Aisha sat across from him, her face etched with concern. "Trauma does strange things to the mind, Zephyr. Or should I call you Elliot? He shook his head, lost. I don't know who I am anymore. Just then, Aisha's phone buzzed. Her eyes widened as she read the message. We need to move. Now. What? Why? Zephyr asked, panic rising in his throat. That was my contact in the department. Victor Rousseau's men are on their way. They're coming to silence you, permanently. As they raced through the night, sirens wailing in the distance, Zephyr felt a strange calm settle over him. He might not know who he truly was, but he knew one thing for certain. He was done being a pawn in someone else's game. Aisha, he said, his voice steady, I think it's time we set a trap of our own. The inspector glanced at him, a glimmer of admiration in her eyes. What did you have in mind? Zephyr, or Elliot, or whoever he truly was, allowed himself a small, determined smile, something worthy of a Hollywood ending. As dawn broke over the City of Angels, the stage was set for a final act that would expose the rotten core of Tinseltown and force Zephyr to confront the ultimate question. In a world of smoke and mirrors, where does the act end and the real person begin? Little did he know, the answer would come at a price higher than he could have ever imagined. And as the pieces of his fractured identity finally began to align, Zephyr would face a choice that would define not just who he was, but who he would become. The clock was ticking, the cameras were rolling, and somewhere in the wings, fate waited to deliver its final, earth-shattering twist. As the sun rose over Los Angeles, casting long shadows across the city's iconic palm trees, Zephyr Thorne, or was it Elliot Vance, stood before a mirror in a dingy motel room. His reflection stared back, a face both familiar and strange. It's time! Inspector Cautry's voice came from behind him. Are you ready? Zephyr took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders. As ready as I'll ever be. The plan was simple, yet audacious. Use himself as bait to draw out Victor Rousseau and expose the full extent of the Hollywood mogul's corruption. But as they drove towards the rendezvous point, a nagging doubt gnawed at Zephyr's mind. Aisha, he said quietly, what if I can't pull this off? What if I'm not the man I thought I was? Either of them. The inspector's eyes met his in the rearview mirror. Listen to me, you're more than just Zephyr or Elliot. You're the man who's going to bring down an empire built on lies. That's who you are. Her words steeled his resolve. As they pulled up to the abandoned studio lot where it had all begun, Zephyr felt a strange sense of coming full circle. The lot was eerily quiet as Zephyr made his way through the crumbling sets, every shadow seeming to hold a potential threat. And then, well, the prodigal son returns. Victor Rousseau emerged from behind a dilapidated facade, flanked by two burly bodyguards. His smile was cold, predatory. Victor, Zephyr acknowledged, fighting to keep his voice steady. I think it's time we had a chat about the truth. The producer's eyes narrowed. Truth? In Hollywood? Oh, my dear boy, you really are naive. Maybe, Zephyr conceded, but I'm not the same man I was when this all started. I know who I am now, and I know what you've done. Victor's laughter echoed through the empty lot. And what exactly do you think you know? Zephyr took a step forward, his heart pounding. I know that you've been blackmailing actors and directors for years. I know that you were behind the accident that caused my memory loss. And I know that you've been using Elliot, the fake Elliot, to launder money for your less-than-legal enterprises. For a moment, a flicker of uncertainty crossed Victor's face. But it was quickly replaced by a sneer. Impressive. But tell me, Elliot, what do you plan to do with this information? This! Zephyr shouted, pulling a small device from his pocket and pressing a button. Suddenly, the lot was flooded with light. Hidden cameras emerged from every nook and cranny, their red lights blinking accusingly. And from behind the surrounding buildings, a swarm of FBI agents appeared, weapons drawn. Victor Rousseau! Inspector Cautry's voice boomed through a megaphone. You're under arrest. The look of utter shock on Victor's face was almost comical. As the agents closed in, Zephyr felt a weight lift from his shoulders. It was over. The truth was finally out. In the days that followed, Hollywood was rocked to its core. The trial of Victor Rousseau exposed decades of corruption, blackmail, and fraud that reached the highest levels of the entertainment industry. As for Zephyr, or rather, the real Elliot Vance, the process of reclaiming his identity was long and painful. Memories returned in fragments, each one a piece of a puzzle he was only now beginning to understand. The imposter Elliot, the man who had stolen his life, was sentenced to years in prison. But as Zephyr watched him being led away, he felt an unexpected pang of empathy. They had both been victims, in their own way, of a system that valued illusion over truth. Months later, as Zephyr stood on the balcony of his hillside home, the home that had always been his, even when he didn't know it, he reflected on the journey that had brought him here. "Penny for your thoughts?" Isha's voice came from behind him. Their relationship had deepened through the ordeal, a bond forged in the fire of truth. Zephyr turned to her, a small smile playing on his lips. "I was just thinking, in all those years of trying to be someone else, I never realized that the greatest role I could play was myself." Aisha took his hand, her touch grounding him in the present. "So, what's next for the real Elliot Vance?" He gazed out at the twinkling lights of Los Angeles, a city that had both broken and remade him. I think it's time to tell my story, the whole story." As the sun set on another day in the City of Angels, Zephyr Thorne, now and forever Elliot Vance, knew that his greatest performance was yet to come. Not on a screen or a stage, but in the real world, living authentically as the man he was always meant to be.